In dark smoke-filled rooms of the 1930s, the world's great powers tried to do the impossible and legislate peace through ship tonnage. The Washington and London naval treaties were meant to end the arms race that helped spark the First World War. But instead they birthed a decade of creative accounting and some of history's most audacious lies. Here are the top 5 lawbreakers, from the exploiters of loopholes to those who treated the treaties as mere suggestions. At number 5, the United Kingdom. The British were in a tough spot. As the architects of many of these treaties, they felt a desperate need to be honourable. But as an island, Britain could not afford to have a weak navy, so their strategy wasn't to lie about the ship's existence, but to play a masterful game with the definition of standard displacement. Under the Washington Naval Treaty, standard displacement was defined as the ship fully manned and equipped, without fuel and reserve feed water. The British Admiralty realized this was a goldmine. For the carrier HMS Ark Royal, they officially declared a displacement of 22,000 tons. In reality, the ship was pushing more, around 28,000 tons, when actually ready for sea. They achieved this by excluding non-essential items from the official weight report. They categorized massive amounts of ammunition, spare aircraft parts, and even some of the crew's living amenities as consumable stores rather than part of the ship's permanent structure. When the Ark Royal launched, she was significantly more capable, able to carry more planes and have thicker deck armor than the treaty should have allowed. At number 4, the United States. The Americans were perhaps the most legally savvy of the group. They didn't want to build illegal ships, they wanted to take old ships and make them accidentally better. The treaty allowed for 3,000 tons of additional weight for modernization against air and submarine attacks. The US Navy took this 3,000-ton allowance and treated it like a suggestion. During the 30s, older battleships like the New York and Nevada were brought in for protection upgrades. The Navy added massive torpedo bulges to the sides of the hulls, which not only added center mass but also increased the ship's beam, providing more stability for new heavier anti-aircraft guns. By the time they were done, many of these older ships had gained 4,000 to 5,000 tons. When international inspectors questioned the extra weight, the US argued that the weight wasn't offensive but defensive, and therefore shouldn't be counted against the tonnage limits. It was a brilliant bit of semantic gymnastics. They were effectively building new ships inside the hulls of old ones. Now at number 3, Italy. Italy's approach was much more Mediterranean. Italy simply told everyone what they wanted to hear and then did whatever they liked. The Zara-class heavy cruisers are the gold standard for this. The treaty limit for heavy cruisers was 10,000 tons with 8-inch guns. Italy desperately wanted heavy armor to protect their ships from French cruisers, but armor is heavy. The famous Regia Marina officially listed the Zara, Fiume, Gorizia, and Pola at exactly 10,000 tons. But in truth, the ships were over 11,500 tons dry, and nearly 14,500 tons at full load. To pull this off, they engaged in a massive disinformation campaign. They distributed fake blueprints to the press and foreign naval inspectors that showed much thinner armor plates than were actually being bolted onto the ships. They even saved weight on paper by excluding the weight of the crew's personal effects and reducing the official weight of the engines. When these ships showed up at international reviews, they looked sleek and compliant, but they were actually the most heavily armored cruisers of their times. This was a fact their enemies only discovered when shells started bouncing off them in the early 1940s. In second place, Germany and its pocket battleships. Germany was a special case. Initially limited by the Treaty of Versailles to 10,000-ton ships, they built the Deutschland class, nicknamed pocket battleships by the British. These ships were a middle finger to the world. They had the speed of a cruiser but the guns of a battleship. Officially, they were 10,000 tons. In reality, they were closer to 12,000 tons standard and 15,000 tons fully loaded. But the real cheating happened after the 1935 Anglo-German naval agreement. Hitler promised to keep the German fleet at 35% of the British fleet, but the Nazi regime had no intention of following the rules. They began building Type 1934 destroyers that were massive, nearly 3,000 tons, while claiming they were much smaller. The peak of this deception was the Bismarck. Germany told the world the Bismarck was a 35,000-ton battleship, the legal limit. In reality, the ship was 41,700 tons standard and over 50,000 tons fully loaded. They hid the extra tonnage by lying about the thickness of the steel and the weight of the massive 15-inch gun turrets. By the time the British realized how big the Bismarck really was, it was already in the North Atlantic. Japan's violation was so total that it moved beyond cheating into a complete denial of the treaty system. In 1934, Japan gave notice that they were withdrawing from the naval treaties entirely, but they remained secretive about what they were building next. This led to a period of ghost ships. First, they built the Mogami-class cruisers. They were designed with 5 triple 6-inch turrets, making them light cruisers on paper. However, the Japanese designed the ship so that the barbettes, the holes in the deck, were large enough to fit twin 8-inch heavier turrets. The moment war looked certain, they swapped the guns. It was a modular cheat that gave them a fleet of heavy cruisers hidden in plain sight. But the Yamato class was the ultimate betrayal. While the US and UK were still trying to design ships around the 35,000 or 45,000 ton limits, Japan was building the Yamato. It was 65,000 tons standard, nearly double the legal limit. They kept this a secret through absolute paranoia. Workers were sworn to silence under pain of death, and massive curtains were hung around the dry docks so no one could see the hull shapes. They even lied about the size of the guns, calling them special type 40 cm guns, 16-inch, when they were actually 46 cm, 18.1 inch. The US Navy didn't know the Yamato's true size and firepower until after the war ended. It remains the single greatest successful deception in naval history. On paper, Washington and London were supposed to freeze the oceans. No more dreadnought panic. No more national pride measured in gun caliber and armor thickness. But treaties do not stop fear. They just teach it new vocabulary. Because every one of these nations learned the same lesson: if you cannot outbuild your rivals, then you outsmart the paperwork. You hide weight in the margins. You rename offensive upgrades as defensive. You publish numbers that look clean, while the reality sits lower in the waterline. Britain bent definitions to keep an empire protected. America turned modernization into a loophole wide enough to sail through. Italy smiled, nodded, and printed blueprints that were pure fiction. Germany built ships that were political statements made of steel. And Japan stepped into silence and built monsters behind curtains. And here is the irony. The treaties did not prevent an arms race. They simply delayed it, distorted it, and then unleashed it all at once, when the rules finally broke. Because once deception becomes normal, trust collapses. And when trust collapses, every navy assumes the worst. Every designer adds just a little more armor. Every admiral asks for just a little more gun. And the world drifts back to the same old truth. The sea does not care what your paperwork says. Displacement is not a number, it is a reality. And when war comes, the ocean exposes every lie. If you enjoyed this breakdown, subscribe to Ships of War, and tell me what list we should do next. The most overrated battleship, the deadliest cruiser, or the carrier that changed everything. Until next time, keep your powder dry, and your tonnage unofficial.